They always believed we were predictable. They charted our technology, studied our wars, measured our lifespans, and even mapped the neural signatures that flickered inside our fragile human skulls. Empires rose across the stars, convinced they understood the species called human. But there was one thing, one obsession, that no star map, no algorithm, no empire could ever predict. This obsession did not rest inside our machines or our cities. It lived inside our marrow, inside the quiet corners of our minds, where logic ends and something far more dangerous begins. To the alien empires who rule the void, it is not our weapons they fear. It is not our fleets, nor our armies, nor our numbers. It is the one thing they could never truly replicate: the human need to finish what we begin. Centuries after the event, the Dominion records still classify it as the persistence anomaly. To humans, it is just who we are. According to surviving data logs, the first sign of this terror began at the edge of a forgotten system, Solarian Outpost 47, a station no larger than a small city. It should have been wiped from existence in hours, but it was not. The Alien War Council, a collection of 8 elder species with dominion over half the galactic spiral, deployed over 2,000 ships to crush it. They expected surrender in minutes. They expected silence after the bombardment. Instead, what they received was something else. I have studied every piece of recovered telemetry, every fractured log entry, every pulse of battlefield chatter. It all points to one undeniable pattern. The humans did not just fight, they refused to stop. Even when logic demanded retreat, even when their commanders were dead, even when their oxygen was thinning, and their orbital defenses were turned to ash, they kept moving, improvising, clawing their way through the impossible. The Dominion ships, efficient and precise, began to slow their assault. Not because they were losing firepower, but because for the first time in thousands of recorded conquests, they could not understand their enemy. The last transmission from the alien command vessel before it fell silent was a single line translated later by linguistic archivists. It said, "They know they are going to die, and they keep coming." This was the beginning of the anomaly. But to understand why the galaxy trembles at this obsession, one must go deeper, beyond the battles, beyond the legends, into the cold, clinical truth. I have spent years reconstructing the sequence of events. The human obsession is not rage, it is not blind fury, it is something far colder. It is an unbreakable fixation on finishing the mission, finishing the promise, finishing the fight. And on Solarian Outpost 47, that fixation became the spark that lit a galactic terror. I have spent decades studying the archives of the Outer War, and yet there is a single word that lingers in every account, every recording, every fragmented data log. Obsession. Not the kind that passes like a fever, not a fleeting surge of emotion or hunger. This was something older, deeper, far more dangerous. It was human. It was the reason entire fleets burned. It was the reason the Dominion Council met in silence for 7 standard cycles after the siege of Cygnus Gate. The alien races of the galaxy had charted war in their own terms. Clean, efficient, governed by logic and probability. But humanity rewrote that language with their own blood. And they did it with an obsession none of us fully understood. According to the surviving logs from the Cygnus Gate campaign, the human outpost there had been surrounded by Dominion forces for 36 cycles. Statistically, their defenses should have collapsed after the 4th cycle. Every strategic model agreed. Their food stores were exhausted. Atmospheric filtration was failing. Their soldiers had been operating on less than 40% combat capacity for days. And yet the Dominion's advance stalled. Patrol cruisers held their distance. Assault carriers circled like predators unsure of their prey. The data suggests a moment of hesitation, as if the alien fleet itself was unsure whether the prey before it was still prey at all. The first unease began with the transmissions. Humans were not sending distress signals. They were broadcasting music, songs, ancient war chants. It echoed through subspace like a pulse of something primal. To most alien strategists, it was noise, a meaningless gesture of defiance. But to the soldiers in orbit who heard it again and again, the sound did something they could not explain. It unsettled them. The Dominion warriors, creatures bred for precision and silence, began to misfire in training. Their tactical AIs reported irregularities in heart rate, focus, and morale. One soldier in the logs described it. It felt like the sound itself was waiting for us to make a mistake. As if they weren't trapped. As if we were. According to the Council's own war simulations, humans should have surrendered long before that point. Every other species would have. That is the simple, brutal truth. Surrender preserves life. It preserves structure. It allows negotiations to proceed. But humans, they don't calculate like that. They let obsession take the place of reason. Their obsession was not with survival, but with making sure their enemy remembered them. Even if they died, especially if they died, the transmissions grew louder, layered with battlefield recordings of past wars, as though they were reaching across centuries to remind the Dominion of every fight humanity had ever refused to lose. The Dominion had never faced an enemy who glorified its own suffering like a badge of honor. The records from the Dominion ship, Harvestrin, are among the most disturbing. One audio log survived. A captain's voice, trembling in a way that seems almost alien in itself, described what he saw from orbit. They stood on the ramparts with no shields left. The oxygen was burning away, and they raised their banners higher. There were less than 100 of them left, and they were still singing. The Dominion was designed to crush resistance, not to witness it become something more dangerous, something contagious. That night, the assault carriers did not descend. They hovered in silence. Their crews, trained in perfect obedience, found their hands shaking. Why did this happen? To the Council, the behavior was irrational. To the Dominion, it was horrifying. To humanity, it was instinct. Humans have this terrifying ability to make their destruction meaningful. They turn the act of dying into an act of war. Every alien empire had spent centuries engineering predictability into their wars, controlled casualty rates, measured timelines, projected outcomes. Humanity dragged war into chaos again, and they did it with smiles carved from exhaustion and fury. The Dominion had numbers, humans had obsession. And obsession isn't measured in fleets. The siege should have ended in 3 days. It lasted 60. Every night, Dominion ships observed strange movements inside the crumbling human stronghold. The humans had started carving symbols into the steel. They welded their own armor into the walls. They etched names of their dead into every bulkhead. They were preparing to be remembered. And perhaps that was the moment the Dominion lost. Not in gunfire, not in fleets, but in spirit. Dominion officers began to argue among themselves for the first time. Some advocated burning the colony from orbit. Others refused, not out of mercy but out of fear. Fear that killing them would make martyrs. Fear that destroying them would only immortalize the obsession they were witnessing. One analyst described the scene from a surveillance drone. They should have been broken. But what we saw did not look like defeat. It looked like worship. Worship of an idea we could not comprehend. That idea is what terrifies us to this day. The humans do not worship their gods in moments of war. They worship the act of defiance itself. And that is something no strategy can quantify. No algorithm can anticipate it. No empire can fully control it. As the siege dragged on, reports of Dominion troop desertions began to surface. Entire battalions feigned system failures to avoid descending to the surface. The songs, the chants, the relentless broadcast, it got inside their minds. You must understand, Dominion soldiers are not weak. They were bred in engineered birthing chambers, raised in disciplined environments where fear is excised from them. And yet, facing less than 100 dying humans, they hesitated. Some reported dreams. Others claimed the sound of human voices echoed through their ship corridors at night, even when the transmissions were off. To this day, Dominion scientists deny that this was possible. But fear doesn't care about science. It spreads. The Council's archives record an emergency session after day 50 of the siege. One of the high strategists is quoted saying, "This is not war. This is contagion. Their obsession is a weapon." That statement was classified for years. I found it buried in an encrypted transcript. The Council had realized that humanity's greatest danger wasn't its fleets, or its weapons, or its numbers. It was the infection of their will. If they could not be broken, then the Dominion itself might fracture in the act of trying. The end came not with an invasion, but with a retreat. On day 61, Dominion ships silently pulled away. No bombardment, no final assault, just silence. A silence more unsettling than any explosion. The human stronghold was in ruins. 78 survivors crawled through ash and steel, too weak to raise their heads. But they had won, not by destroying their enemy, but by making them fear what they had become. The Council never acknowledged this retreat in their official records, but the unofficial ones, the ones whispered in officer quarters and strategy rooms, tell a different story. The Dominion didn't lose because it lacked strength. It lost because it stared into the abyss of human obsession and blinked first. In the years that followed, the name Cygnus Gate became something more than a battle. It became a warning for the Dominion, for the Council, for every empire that would ever consider humanity a simple species of flesh and stubbornness. They began altering their war doctrines. They issued new training protocols, psychological reinforcement programs, even conditioning officers to resist human psychological warfare. It changed everything. Empires built entire strategies not to defeat human weapons, but to survive human will. I have studied dozens of campaigns since then. Different planets, different wars, different faces, but the same pattern repeats itself. When humans are cornered, when logic demands surrender, something inside them ignites. They find meaning not in winning, but in not being erased. That is their obsession. And that obsession terrifies alien empires because it is not bound by the rules of war. It doesn't need victory to exist. It only needs resistance. A Dominion officer once said in a debriefing, "We do not fight humans to kill them. We fight them to keep them from turning us into them." What none of the empires understood at the time was that this obsession is not a strategy. It is their nature. It is the way they are wired to exist. To humans, surrender is worse than death. Surrender means erasure, and for them, death with meaning is not a loss. It's a message. That message has burned across battlefields, across worlds, across centuries. Every attempt to suppress it has only made it louder. I have walked through the ruins of Cygnus Gate myself. The place is quiet now. The steel bones of the fortress remain buried beneath layers of ash, but there are carvings on the walls, names, slogans, fragments of what they believed in. Even after centuries, they have not faded. The Dominion tried to burn them. The storms tried to erase them, but the words remain. They read like something between a prayer and a threat. We are still here. And that is what haunts the galaxy, because they always are. The obsession that began there has rippled through time. Entire species avoid fighting humans directly now, not because of their weapons, but because no empire wants to face something it cannot measure, cannot break, and cannot outlast. And if you listen closely on certain frequencies, if you tune your equipment to the old channels, you can still hear it. Faint. A whisper through the static. Their song. A promise to themselves and a warning to the rest of us. And that is why the Dominion remembers Cygnus Gate not as a battle, but as a scar. When the war ended, the Council attempted to bury what happened at Cygnus Gate. Official records called it a tactical repositioning, as if retreat was something intentional, planned, controlled. But the data that survived in the Black Archives tells a different truth. No alien empire willingly retreats from a battlefield they have already won on every measurable level. They fled because they were afraid, not of a weapon, not of a super soldier, not of some miracle technology. They fled from a state of mind they could not defeat. Humanity's obsession had turned the battlefield into something unrecognizable. And once the Dominion saw it for what it was, they could not unsee it. Years passed. Empires grew cautious. Every species has its own cultural cautionary tales. The Androsians speak of the night of shattered glass. The Rilthians whisper about the burning moons. For the Dominion, their cautionary tale is Cygnus Gate. For them, it is not a legend. It is a strategic trauma, etched into their war doctrine. Recruits are trained with simulated human encounters, not because humanity is their strongest enemy, but because humanity is their most dangerous one. You must understand something about galactic war. Most species fight for resources, for territory, for preservation. Their methods are pragmatic, mathematical. If a position is lost, they fall back. If the cost outweighs the gain, they surrender. But humans, they don't retreat the way others do. When they have nothing left, they don't fall back. They dig deeper. Their obsession is not an aberration. It is a cornerstone of their existence, and no amount of analysis or prediction has ever contained it. The Dominion's strategic division compiled what they called the Human Obsession Index. I've read the entire file. It is as unsettling as it is meticulous. They attempted to measure what cannot be measured. How far a human will go when obsession replaces reason. One incident stands out more than the rest. The Ashen March. 2 centuries after Cygnus Gate, on the frozen world of Velum 4, Dominion forces faced a human militia of only 3,000. They were surrounded by orbital artillery, outgunned by a factor of 17, and isolated from reinforcements. Logically, they should have surrendered within 48 hours. Instead, something else happened. Dominion surveillance drones captured footage of the humans dismantling their own colony, turning their shelters into improvised weapons, converting frozen pipes into explosive shafts, stripping reactors down to bare uranium cores. The humans did not plan to survive. They planned to leave an impression. Every Dominion war model predicted complete human collapse after the second night. But they did not collapse. They marched, through freezing winds that would have cracked open most species' skin, through bombardment that turned steel to glass. They advanced toward Dominion positions not to win, but to burn themselves into their enemy's memory. According to recovered data logs, Dominion officers reported panic among their ranks for the first time since Cygnus Gate. Some soldiers muttered that the ghosts have returned. The humans sang again, not songs of victory, but songs of defiance. Rhythms carried through the snowstorms, haunting and rhythmic, like the heartbeat of something the Dominion could not kill. The Dominion launched wave after wave, but each wave seemed to only make the humans more resolute. When the final breach came, only 417 humans remained. And yet, the Dominion lines fractured first. That moment is preserved in a single line from an intercepted Dominion transmission. They should not be moving anymore, and yet they are. The Dominion eventually overran Velum 4, yes. On paper they won. But when the warships returned to their home systems, something followed them, not in their cargo holds, but in their minds. The surviving soldiers carried with them the memory of those last human faces, eyes alight with something between rage and worship. Whole battalions broke discipline. Some never returned to active service. The Dominion tried to suppress these stories, but fear has a way of slipping through cracks. It whispers in mess halls, it grows in silence, it outlives facts. The Council learned something terrifying that day. Human obsession isn't bound to a single place or time. It spreads like a signal through history. Once you've seen it, once you've felt it, you cannot go back to seeing war as a clean, predictable thing. After Velum 4, a shift occurred. For the first time in recorded galactic history, an empire began avoiding direct conflict with an inferior power, not out of respect, but out of dread. The Dominion's generals began to withdraw earlier from contested zones. Skirmishes were replaced by standoffs. War for them had always been about control. Humanity's obsession stripped that control away. This brings us to the most unsettling case in the archives, the Whisper Wall. The Whisper Wall was not a battle. It was an encounter. A Dominion fleet stumbled upon a human deep space mining colony in the outer reaches of Tau Tenebrae. It was supposed to be a routine annexation. No resistance expected. Barely 500 colonists. No weapons. No defense grid. By the third hour, they should have raised the Dominion banner and moved on. But something went wrong. When the first Dominion soldiers stepped onto the ice surface, they found the entire colony standing in silence. No weapons, no shields, no screams. Just silence. The colonists had carved massive spirals into the ground, long, deliberate grooves in the ice that stretched for kilometers. The Dominion commander gave the standard surrender order. The humans didn't move. No defiance, no compliance. Just silence. Then one of them spoke into the comnet. 4 words. We are already here. No one knows exactly what happened after. The Dominion fleet logs are corrupted. wiped clean, either by accident or by something else entirely. The only surviving account comes from a single pilot, recovered months later adrift in a lifeboat. Her testimony was shaky, inconsistent, half delirious, but she repeated one thing again and again. They didn't fight. They waited, and I realized for the first time we were the ones being conquered. I have reviewed the sensor records myself. The fleet was intact one moment. The next it was scattered across the system. No massive explosion, no visible attack, just panic. Obsession does not always wear the face of rage. Sometimes it wears the face of inevitability. Humans had learned something at Cygnus Gate. They no longer needed to win battles. They only needed to make their enemies see them differently. This is what terrifies alien empires most, not the fighting, but the waiting. Humans are patient when they need to be, and when that patience is combined with obsession, they become immovable. I've spoken to Dominion strategists off the record. Some of them, cold, calculating beings, admit to it in whispers. They do not care if they win or die, one told me. They only care if they are remembered. How do you fight something that wants to be immortal? The more I've studied, the clearer it becomes. This is not a weapon humanity invented. It's something older, something baked into their species. Their art is filled with it. Their history is soaked in it. They have sung of hopeless battles for millennia, Thermopylae, Stalingrad, the Black Sands of New Eden, each a monument to the same idea, that being remembered matters more than living. That is the real battlefield. Not the physical space where armies clash, but the story that remains after. Humanity wages war not just in the present tense, but in memory, in myth, in legacy. And no empire, not even one as vast as the Dominion, can fully control a story once it leaves their hands. That is why they fear humans. Not because of their numbers, not because of their ships, but because humans can turn their suffering into a weapon sharper than any blade. There is a passage in the Dominion's classified doctrine. In any engagement with human forces, victory is insufficient. Erasure is required. It is a chilling line. It reveals everything. The Dominion does not seek to win. They seek to obliterate every trace of human presence. Because as long as even a whisper remains, the story survives. And when the story survives, so does their obsession. But erasure is not as easy as they hoped. For every ruin they burn, a name is carved deeper. For every song they try to silence, another echoes through the void. You cannot erase a species that builds monuments out of memory itself. I remember the first time I visited the Memorial Drift, the place where hundreds of human derelict ships orbit a dead star. They say no one lives there, but you can hear things. Old transmissions still play on loop, fragments of voices from wars long ended. Some whisper, some scream, some simply say, "We remain." Standing there in the shadow of broken hulls, I understood why the Dominion is terrified. These ships are graves, but they feel alive. Every twisted beam, every etched phrase is a reminder. Even in death, humanity speaks. And it speaks louder than any empire. This is why the Dominion changed its approach. They no longer conquer human worlds in conventional ways. They avoid open war. They blockade. They suffocate. They try to choke humanity slowly, hoping obsession cannot bloom without the spark of direct conflict. But even that has failed, because humans do not need battles to ignite their obsession. They only need purpose. The last incident in the archives is the one I cannot shake. It happened on Kepler Bastion, a mining outpost in the unclaimed sectors. A Dominion observation fleet arrived expecting nothing but resistance in the form of outdated defense platforms. Instead, they found the outpost empty. No bodies, no transmissions. No sign of combat, but carved into the mountain face, across an entire kilometer, was a single sentence, burned into the stone with plasma. This is not over. There were no human survivors, and yet the message felt alive. The Dominion fleet withdrew without firing a shot. Some call this madness. Others call it courage. I call it what it truly is, obsession. A force so old, so ingrained, that even extinction cannot silence it. Humanity's enemies have more power, more ships, more control, but none of them have this, the need to be remembered, even at the cost of everything. When historians of other species speak of war, they speak of dates and numbers, ships and casualties. When we speak of human wars, we speak of echoes, because their wars do not end when the last shot is fired. They linger in silence, in ruins in the minds of their enemies. That is the true battlefield. That is why their obsession terrifies us. There is a chilling footnote in the Council's classified summary of the human wars. It reads, "They do not need to win. They only need to make us afraid to fight them again." That line was written over 200 years ago. It remains true now. Entire Dominion fleets patrol the edges of human space, not to invade, but to make sure they never have to invade. And so the galaxy has learned a strange kind of respect. Not admiration, not reverence, something colder, something sharper. A respect born from fear, the kind of fear that builds entire doctrines. The kind of fear that rewrites the rules of war. I am not human. I have studied their wars, their voices, their ruins. I have stood among the stones of Cygnus Gate and felt the weight of their obsession. And I can tell you this, empires will rise and fall. Systems will burn. Fleets will fade into dust. But their obsession will remain, like a pulse in the void. A constant, a warning. You can defeat a human army. You can conquer a human world. But you can never truly silence them, because to be human is to refuse erasure. And somewhere out there in the dark between stars, their song still plays.